Ayodele Adio, the candidate of Youth Party YP for Eti-Osa local government election holding on July 12, 2025. What are your plans? What are you looking up to do in Eti-Osa? Peradventure, you are elected as the local government chairman of Eti-Osa.
Well, I mean, first of all, you talk about my plans. I have what I call the RISE plan. It's my economic plan to transform Eti-Osa, which projects to create about 15,000 jobs generally, improve the hospitality landscape, retrain the young people in that corridor, and completely transform the environmental outlook, in Eti-Osa. So if you look at the RISE plan, R of course means recycling waste to wealth. Eti-Osa alone generates close to 200 tons of waste, every day. And if you look at that cumulatively over an entire year, it's about 73,000 tons of waste. My plan, obviously, is to transform particularly food waste into biogas using the latest technology that will provide energy to power at least 10,000 homes. That same amount of waste, if recycled, can power 15,000 homes with cooking gas, and of course can power diesel engines for transportation within Eti-Osa in itself. So on recycling alone, because thankfully you know that the Lagos state has domesticated its electricity its electricity, what's it called again? The electricity policy has been domesticated in Lagos State, where it can generate and transmit its own electricity locally. So my plan is to be able to plug that waste recycling into the grid in Lagos State to be able to power homes, in Eti-Osa. But more importantly is that I want to raise an environmental core of at least 10,000 young people that will be working in and around the value chain of the environment, whether it's collecting waste efficiently and effectively, whether it's transporting this waste to dump sites or to collection centers, or whether it's recycling these wastes. This entire value chain, which will also include educating residents and people in marketplaces, is going to create at least 10,000 jobs. And that way, we can keep a very healthy environment in that corridor. And more importantly, there seems to be typhoid fever is endemic, in Eti-Osa, and that's largely because of the amount of pollution that comes from whether it's food waste or plastic waste or all the waste, that are generated there. Because of the poor hygiene, in the environment, you have people coming down with a lot of typhoid fever. And so not just the fact that we're going to create jobs and the fact that we're going to create wealth from the waste that is generated there, we also want to combat the health challenges that people are dealing with, in that particular environment. And that's what we want to do in terms of environment. We also want to invest in critical skills development. Now, in Eti-Osa, you will know that the predominant business there is hospitality, it's real estate, and of course the creative economy. And those are the three major sectors upon which we want to drastically improve the skills of young people in that area. And I'm not talking makeshift or hard-baked skill training programs that most people are used to. I'm talking about the kind of skill programs where people are certified, whether as electricians, whether as furniture makers and things like that, so that they can directly be plugged into that ecosystem where there's constant construction happening, in Eti-Osa, and they have jobs. And these are jobs that will pay nothing less than the minimum wage. And so that training is going to produce very high-skilled labor force that will power the construction industry in that particular corridor. Of course, we also are going to train a lot of people in hospitality, because also that area is known for, it's almost a hospitality haven, if you asked me. And so we're going to train people, not just to be regular receptionists, but to build their capacity to climb the ladder in the hospitality industry, where they can function at supervisory and managerial levels, just beyond being waiters. And in fact, even at the very bare minimum as waiters or bartenders, there are specific skills that many places you go to around the country, they don't have the kind of skills to work in those places. They just do things anyhow. So we are going to empower people with those skills so that they can fill that particular sector, effectively. And the same thing we're going to do in terms of, the tourism plan that we have, to strengthen the tourism sector in that particular environment. And we're going to do that, obviously, besides the training, is to invest, in the beaches along that places, to invest in public parks, especially water parks in that area, so that it also ties to supporting the environment. And finally, we're going to empower communities. And empowering communities, my vision is to bring people together to drive, a vision for an Eti-Osa that will become one of the most important districts or municipalities in the entire continent. And the only way we can do that, is to strengthen our community by first making it safe and secure, so that we can power a 24-hour economy. And you know that every time an economy runs for 24 hours, it creates 30% more jobs than the daytime jobs that you already have. So in a nutshell, I believe that the RISE plan that I'm proposing and putting forward will make Eti-Osa safer, will create meaningful jobs, for young people, will put monies in the pockets of young people through my Creative Credit Fund, and more importantly, will make that the most important tourist destination in the sub-region. And that is what my vision for, that local government is.
But more importantly, are you looking at any plans for education, most especially primary education, probably to work in collaboration with the state government to provide basic primary education for Eti-Osa, if eventually?
Yeah, I mean, of course. There are plans for, primary education and primary healthcare to strengthen those very two important institutions. I believe in the quality or the power of education to transform lives, to transform communities, and to transform nations. So, of course, I'll be making significant investments in primary education. And to that extent, what I intend to do, basically, is to improve the quality of teaching in the classroom environments. We want to hire better teachers, ensure that they are better remunerated, that they are better trained, so that they can impact our children better in the classroom. I also want to improve the classroom learning experience so that students are not going into conditions that demotivate them and conditions that make them struggle to learn. So we're going to improve the learning experience for students in that particular local government. And I'm going to do that by investing in technology. And like I said, the two most important things is the learning environment and the quality of teachers who are teaching in the classrooms. And so we're going to hire the best teachers, we're going to train them and improve their remunerations, like you rightfully said, in collaboration with the state government, so that we can have better outputs, from the quality of teachers we put before students in that class. And so that the struggle that many middle-income families go through, where they have to pay premium for primary school education for their children, many of whom cannot even afford that because public schools are really not an alternative for them. I think by improving the quality of our primary school in that area will reduce the burden for many low and middle income families who can free up those resources that will drive consumption in that particular area. So just by improving classroom experience and improving the quality of teaching and the entire environment, we give parents an alternative to reduce the burden that they face in paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for their children to attend primary schools. And so they can attend public schools and free up resources, to do other things that they want to do, to improve the standard of living in their home. So yes, education is a real priority for us.
Now, it is not just enough for you to have very good plans, great plans, but I also want to interrogate your relationship with Eti-Osa local government. Some of the things we have in this country is that you see people who doesn't live in a particular local government. They just spring up, they want to come and be the local government chairman. What's your relationship? What relationship have you developed with the people of Eti-Osa, or with that local government?
So I mean, I have very long-standing relationship with that local government. I mean, first of all, I don't just live and work there. In fact, I tell you a quick story. I don't want to say when I first came into Lagos, because I've always been coming to Lagos all my life. My mother is from Ekpetedo, Agbole Mogaji. So I've always, been from Lagos, and I've always visited Lagos. But as an adult, who was ready to come and work and pursue my dreams, when I first stepped into Lagos, I think around 2010, 2009 or 2010, I moved into Eti-Osa, lived somewhere in Abraham Adesonya Estate. And that was where my love affair with the environment began. And so you take that several years forward to when I even set up office, in Eti-Osa, and I was doing well, grew my business around this particular local government. But I got frustrated with the lack of public services in that area. And the first thing I did when I noticed the quality of governance, in Eti-Osa was very poor, was to launch a community newspaper called the Lekki Post, which I ran for 5 years. And we're printing about 5,000 copies, bi-weekly, that's every 2 weeks. And we distributed it for free. And through that newspaper, I was able to develop, close relationships with community leaders who were constantly giving us stories of the things that were happening in their community. And I got to learn a lot more. I mean, coming into Eti-Osa sometime in 2009, I thought it was, a place built in heaven, because you only see the luxury buildings. I never knew that there were communities, backward communities, forgotten communities, impoverished communities, just behind many of these high towers. And that newspaper opened my eyes to a lot of these things. I went into so many of these deprived and forgotten communities, like I talk about, many of them who never had electricity. We fought for them, for the government to provide transformers where necessary. People who were facing injustice or were repressed, my newspaper at the time, fought for many of these people. So that really helped me build very local, strong ties, with many parts of the communities, in that corridor. And it's an experience that I will cherish for a very long time, because it's almost amazing to see what it meant to a local carpenter that his story got into a local newspaper about a pain point that no one was listening to. And then we gave him a platform to tell his or her story. When people are unjustly evacuated, from what, we call slums, and we told their stories, they felt empowered, they felt listened to, and they felt heard. So in a nutshell, I think nothing gave me more to immerse myself in that community like the newspaper did. Because, I broke bread with different ballers, with kings, with market women, and that gave me a deep understanding of that community, and hence, nursed the ambition of wanting to really transform it, given the potential that is inherent there.
You've told us a lot of things you want to achieve if you are elected as a local government chairman of Eti-Osa. But before then, you have to win the election.
Oh, yes.
And to win the election, you are going to contest against a ruling party.
Yes.
And if you look at the history of Lagos, since 1999, it has been the ruling party clearing all the local government elections. How confident are you that you'll be able to defeat APC in the election?
I think that's an interesting question. And I believe this is even the most important question in the local government season. And I'm glad you are the one asking that question. I think that the APC haven't won elections in Lagos State over time because they have been the most popular party. They've dominated local government elections because, one, there's usually voter apathy. Less than 3% of people turn out for local government elections. The second is that they have a systemic suppression vote mechanism where they intimidate people from other political parties who want to come and vote on election day, which also goes back to fuel the voter apathy that I talked about earlier. But three, and most importantly, is that the referee, which is supposed to be LISEC, that organizes elections in Lagos State, have over the years been found to seemingly, unwittingly, sometime inadvertently, promote the interest of the ruling party. So they have not been a fair umpire over the years. They haven't created a level playing field for people to compete and test their popularity. They simply have just been the vehicle upon which candidates have been coronated from the APC. Now, what are we going to do differently, this year, given the challenges that are confronting us? I think the first is that part of my campaign strategy is that I have simultaneously also pursued a legal strategy. And that legal strategy is to dismantle the systemic corruption and the institutional rigging that takes place in local government elections. And the first thing that we're attacking is the fact that LISEC doesn't have the powers to delineate wards in Nigeria. It is only INEC that is being conferred the powers by the Constitution to delineate wards. And I mean, I'm sure that you've been following the story in Delta State, the ward that INEC tried to delineate, that's causing problems between Shekiri and Ijo. We're talking about 4 polling units. And the entire state is under a lot of pressure because people are clamoring that INEC should not do that. And they are reeling out the consequences of that action. But here we are in Lagos State, where LISEC brazenly, consistently interferes with wards and delineates polling units across board every single local government election season. It is not only unconstitutional, it disenfranchises people who come out to vote on election day. Because that means once you come out to vote on election day, you will be told that this is not your polling unit because there's a likelihood that by redistributing the polling unit, you would have been moved from one point to another point. And that disenfranchises you completely. In fact, as I'm speaking to you today, there is no political party that has the polling guide for an election that is 6 weeks away. And a polling guide is supposed to tell you where the polling units are located in whatever wards that they have illegally delineated in the first instance. So not only did you usurp the powers of delineating wards, you still do not even have the fairness of mind to share what you have already delineated with other political parties. So if we're trying to train agents now to fill polling units, I don't know which agent is going to fill any polling units because we don't even know where the polling units are going to be located, right? So this is why we have gone to court, or this is why we'll be going to court, to compel INEC to stick with the wards and registration areas as already delineated by INEC. Because in any case, no state conducts elections without getting voters register from INEC, isn't it? It is INEC that gives you the voters register to conduct elections. So where do you derive the powers to then delineate this polling unit? So we're going to challenge that to the very end. The same way we're also challenging the fact that, and this is also where we need your help, as media organizations, we seem to have accepted that elections should hold in 57 LCDs and local governments in Lagos. It's a complete aberration. It's against the Supreme Court decision that ruled clearly in 2004 that there are only 20 recognized local governments in Lagos. The Supreme Court at the time also said, if you want to create more local governments, you pursue a constitutional amendment process that will then recognize the new local governments that you create. Last year, the president, through his attorney general, took 36 governors to the Supreme Court to demand autonomy for local governments across the country. The Supreme Court agreed with the president. And in one of the reliefs that the attorney general sought was that states that refuse to comply with Section 1 and 7 of the Constitution will lose their right to receive funding for local governments from the Federation account. And one of the provisions is that Section 1, Schedule 1 of the Constitution clearly lists the amount of recognized local governments in Nigeria. And so by virtue of that, running or contesting elections into LCDs that do not exist is a complete aberration, is an illegality that should not continue. And I believe that civil society organizations and the media should constantly hold LISEC to fire, that you're running or contesting elections into illegal LCDs that are strangers to the Constitution. The Attorney General has said that local governments come and open bank accounts at the CBN. Who is going to open bank accounts in Lagos? Which of the 57 people? That's the million-dollar question. Yeah. So in Eti-Osa alone, right, Eti-Osa normally should cover from Obalende to Shongotedo. But within Eti-Osa now, we have 5 LCDAs. So the question is, which of these LCDAs is going to open accounts with the CBN? So this is the problem, right? And that's why we have also gone to challenge that only 20 local governments have the legitimacy for elections to be conducted around, and they should stick to that. And thirdly, we're also going to court to ensure that no collation center is resident in any local government. Because what used to be the case is that they make the local governments their collation center. And by virtue of that, they shut out every other political party that is going into the convention center, to the collation center to monitor counting and collation of votes. Because obviously they control the local governments. And their boys typically stop you from going in. So all of these things, we're trying to pursue a legal process to compel the umpire to create a level playing field for everybody to compete. Because that's the only way you can have credible elections. And that's the only way people will have confidence to come out, and vote on election day. So my confidence is not so much on whether they are more popular than me or than us as a political party. I know that my opponent is not putting a quarter of the work that I'm putting in. My opponent has not clearly articulated a vision for Eti-Osa. My opponent is not meeting, the people across the community who are desperate for better governance, right? They simply rely on the fact that once they have gotten their ticket in the primary, somebody, somewhere is going to ensure that they automatically become local government chairman. But that's what we're going to change this time, because we're going to compel the umpire to create a level playing field so that those votes will count. And when those votes count, I'm happy if you beat me in a popularity contest, right? But I'm confident that if it's truly, a representative democracy and it's a popularity contest, the APC I see today cannot beat us in an election come July 12th.
Then lastly, what's your confidence in LASEC?
I must say to you honestly, I do not have confidence in an institution that seem to have subverted so many of the laid down provisions of the Constitution. I'll also give you another example. The Rivers State election was annulled at the Supreme Court last year, and a rerun was ordered. And the reason the Supreme Court annulled that election was because the Rivers State Electoral Commission breached the constitutional provision for the time frame allotted to conduct elections. So you know that by virtue of the Constitution, you're supposed to give 150 days to an election. The idea is so that, again, INEC typically stops new voter registration 60 days to an election. So once you give 150 days, you give a window for new voters registration to happen, for people to collect PVCs, those who have lost can replace and things like that. And then INEC can close that 60 days to the election. But the Rivers State Electoral Commission did not do that. They just simply counted 90 days to the general election and announced the election. And the Supreme Court struck it down. That is the exact same thing that LASEC has done in Lagos. They simply calculated 90 days from when the tenure of the current people will expire, and then announced an election. And so they did not give the required extra 60 days to announce elections, so that for proper preparations and all of that. And that's just one. Two is that the legal framework, the laws that are surrounding the governing of an election, many political parties were completely blinded. It took a parley at LASEC's office for us to realize that the Lagos State Local Government Law had been amended and certain provisions had been snuck into it, even after a public hearing that many of us had attended last year and submitted memoranda. Nobody knew when the law was passed. They said it was passed sometime in January 10 or 11 during the fracas assembly. So we didn't even know when the law was passed. So we're going into an election where people were not clear about the guidelines, we're not clear about the legal framework surrounding the elections. So we're just running blind into it. So I cannot have confidence in an institution that simply looks like, and I choose my words carefully, they look like they're playing a script, right? And except, of course, they are forced to do the right thing at every step, you're going to have a coronation exercise and not an election. And that's why we have taken steps to challenge all of these illegality. And thankfully, the chairperson of LISEC is a retired judge. So at least that, gives us some hope that when many of these matters get to court, we have somebody in LISEC who's a former member of the judiciary that, will be happy to adhere to judicial decisions, at the end of the day. But at the moment, I just don't have, any confidence whatsoever that these elections will be free or fair. And like I said earlier, we don't even have the polling guide. So what are we doing?
Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.